There were two massacres of Jews
if I may add something,
under the responsibility, or at least the permission of Muhammad. He bears responsibility for that. Now, you can't say never lifted a hand. Two massacres of Jews on two occasions.
No. You're talking about the Madani period. Let's not mix the Meccan and Madani period.
I'm talking about Muhammad.
Yes.
Period.
No, I think I'm sorry, this is not deliberate, but this is misinformation.
Yeah.
That's why I was asking Dr. Woodberry earlier when he said raiding the caravan in Mecca. It's not in Mecca. And again, the same mix is taking place here. This never happened in Mecca. This happened in Medina and was as a result of betrayal of the Jews during the time of war, which is high treason in any country. And this was not the judgment of the Prophet. It was the judgment of the Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, who was chosen by them to pass a sentence on them. So let's not mix this period. My statement stands correct. For completely 13 years, the Prophet never lifted a finger or allowed even his followers. Actually, his followers came to demand some stand against those persecutors. And the Quran actually testifies to that. أَلَمْ تَرَ إِلَى الَّذِينَ قِيلَ لَهُمْ كُفُّوا أَيْدِيَكُمْ وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ. Those enthusiasts, it says they were told, withhold your hand and establish prayer. Focus on the spirituality. So that's why I'm saying again that it's not a gap really. More than Jesus, much more, 4 times as long. Muslims and the Prophet never lifted a finger.
If I may add something, Dr. Martins, you correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't Jesus call upon his disciples, let that who has a garment sell it and get a sword? Did they do it?
There are lots of...
that was the time he was to be arrested, right?
No. That was long before.
Before.
Yes. There are a lot of symbolic statements of Jesus. For instance, yesterday someone quoted, "If your eye leads you to sin, pluck it out."
That's me.
Yes. Or if your hand robs, then cut it off.
No, if your hand sins, cut it off.
Cut off.
Yeah.
I would have no eyes. I would have no hands. I would have long ago been dead.
This is an instruction of Jesus in the Bible. That's not me.
The point is, there are lots of statements of a symbolic character in the words of Jesus that point to that call us to account for who we are and how we use the gifts and the members that God has given us in this particular case.
Then why don't
it is not an order or a command for literal implementation. That would be simply ridiculous.
Then why don't we take the same symbolic interpretation for the same verses coming from the same New Testament that you are telling us that proves the divinity of Jesus? Why are we using a double standard here?
When we come, for instance, to the death of Jesus, and he says not to use the sword, that is not a symbolic statement. And when Jesus says, "I came not to be served, but to serve and to give my life a ransom for many," it was not a symbolic statement. It was a statement covered in blood.
How about the one when he said, "I came not to send peace, but fire"? Was it symbolic?
Jesus was calling people to account, and he brought judgment into the world, and there were those who would accept and those who would reject, and that split communities, because just as it did in Mecca, it split the Meccan community when Muhammad came with the word of judgment, and so that word of judgment that calls people to account results in divisions, because some will accept and some will reject.
But you said he died for all of our sins. He loves you, Muslims, non-Muslims, believers, disbelievers. Now you talk about a split. And when I quoted the Bible yesterday, talking about sending people to hellfire, that's unquenched. It is not going to fade. It's unquenched fire. And to Jesus instructing people, if your eye calls you to sin, then pluck it out. If your hand calls you to sin, then cut it off. It is better to get to hell, to paradise with a cut hand, maimed, rather than get to hellfire with 2 hands. I can't relate what you're saying to what he's saying.
Each of those has to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
And it's not a matter of interpretation. It's a matter of the text he says and the text you're saying. They are not coinciding to even come closer to any consistency.
I guess I fail to be able to comprehend what you're saying, because I would have plucked my eyes out long ago and cut off my hands long ago. And to literalize sayings of that kind are simply beyond
I'm
comprehension.
not calling for literalizing. I'm sorry. If I'm understood in this way, it is a misunderstanding. What I am saying is, Jesus, and this was my main point. You brought yesterday's discussion in today. My main point today is, you're saying that Muhammad did this, Muhammad fought, Muhammad killed. I'm saying Jesus called his disciples to sell their garments and buy swords. Muhammad, when he was commanded by God, after 13 years of patience and torture and humiliation and extortion, when he was called by God to call his people, he also called them to get the sword. Jesus' disciples did not get the sword. Muhammad's disciples got the sword. Now, what is the difference between the two? To us Muslims, they are the same. Muhammad and Jesus are the same. The difference is the way you look at them. That's all.
I think
they called for the same thing, but the disciples were weak or were not ready or whatever, so they did not get the sword.
When it came down... Oh, go ahead.
All right. What we're talking about in the New Testament context was the little sword for self-defense that was often carried against bandits and things of that nature. It's the difference between self-defense there, and which Jesus would not even allow for himself, you know, with his, when they came to crucify him. So it's the difference between self-defense and the offensive wars, which started before the death of Muhammad to around Arabia itself, and then continued.
We can discuss it one at a time, but see, a session of this sort, we cannot really exhaust what battle and when and why. You know that. It cannot be exhausted here. So this point to be raised at this time, it is never going to be covered here. You know that. We can sit aside and discuss it.
All right, well then, look at this verse. Jesus said to Pilate, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my disciples would fight for me." But you see, he wasn't trying to build that kind of a kingdom, the kind that, and this I think would be one of the differences we would see between Jesus and Muhammad.
May I just have your attention? Please, Dr. Paul will make his final comment because he's going to leave now.
I just want to once again say thank you very much, and I'm sorry that I can't continue in this very weighty conversation, and I wish you all God's rich blessing. One thing that I want to say is, in conversations like this, I always have a heavy heart, because we Christians talk a lot about the love of God and the self-giving of God and the death of Jesus Christ, his willingness to go to death for the sake of humanity. But if you look at Christian history, you could not believe that there was such a claim. So I want to say that I enter into conversations of this kind with a great heaviness of heart, and I want to say that.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Paul. We'll continue with the discussion. I'd like to give him a chance to please just give him a hand and say thank you.
On behalf, before he leaves, on behalf of the Muslim team, we would like to express our gratitude and appreciation for the very kind word by Dr. Martison, whom I say I'm proud to have been involved with him in a dialogue in Minnesota and find him a very good example of what all the prophets have taught. Thank you.
I'm having a little bit of difficulty here that I can see a double standard. When it comes to the sword, we are told that the sword that Jesus spoke about was a little personal sword that people will carry in their belt. Obviously, this is not in the Bible. This is Dr. Woodberry's interpretation. And when it comes to the sword that Muslims talked about, that was invading sword, I would like to point out to Dr. Woodberry that first, the word sword itself does not appear in